Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Let's start today's session with a l'chaim. L'chaim, everybody. By the way, there's this okay it's here, and there's some potato chips. So please help yourselves. There's all coffee over there, coffee and tea. Okay, if you need that. Okay, what I want to do is continue with our discussion. What are the different tools that Judaism provides us in order to help us grow? Okay. So if you're extremely self-satisfied and don't want to change, oh well, you're in the wrong place. We started actually in the past several weeks discussing Torah as a vehicle for change, particularly focusing on the Kabbalistic aspects of Torah as a particularly kind of potent medicine change. I want to continue in that vein and talk about Torah as a vehicle for change. Powerful Torah is, especially given the fact that we are on the of the holiday of Shavuot, right? Shavuot is this Saturday night, but the next Saturday, say Shabbat after this one. So, and of course, Shavuot is a time in which we feel that deep joy for having received the Torah. So it's particularly a topic that we sing in any case. Now I have to warn you of 1.5 things right off the bat. This is going to be Kabbalistic, okay? But it's not a problem. Mo is here. He'll be able to explain it all, okay? So that's one thing. It's going to be pretty Kabbalistic. Dr. Zlotlo will put up with it. He's a good sport. And the half warning, we're going to take a look at a text that we've learned in the past, a passage from Tanya. Some of you have learned, some of you haven't, but it's important in understanding of this. So those of you who have learned it, it's a good review, perhaps even a deeper insight into that particular passage. But everything else is new, hopefully, unless you know everything there is to know. It's even new for me. I've never seen it before until this very moment. We'll just learn it together. That is not true, what I just said. Okay. We're going to take a look at a passage in the Talmud. This is for Dr. Zlotlo. A passage in the Gemara. And we're going to see something I think pretty remarkable, because the Talmud is rather straightforward, but by the time we're done, you're not going to know what end is up, what end is down. You're not going to know what planet you're on. I'm not sure that's good, but it's not going to look, that passage of Talmud will not look the same. Can you handle that? Larry, you okay with that? Put on your seatbelts. Okay. So let's study this passage of the Talmud. Amar Rav Yehuda, minayin la'acharecha min Torah. From where do we know that we're supposed to make a blessing over food after we eat the food? Right? Of course, that's the famous Birkat Hamazon, or people say I'm benching in Yiddish. We're benching after the meal, making the blessing after we eat. So where in the Torah does it say when you're done eating your glatt kosher hamburger that you should bench, should make a blessing? Of course, it's kind of long, the Birkat Hamazon, right? It has 4 paragraphs in it, 4 main paragraphs. How it answers the question, right? Because we want to, from where in the Torah do we derive this? And it answers, ve'achalta ve'savata u've'rachta. You should eat, be say and bless. This is amazing because there are many practices in Judaism that our sages themselves said they are like a mountain hanging on a thread, meaning we have all of the laws fundamental as Shabbat. Shabbat is that's a big thing. How to observe Shabbat properly on every level, the positive things we do, the things we refrain from doing, 39 different categories of activity that we don't do, etc. You would be impressed to find where in the Torah it says not to do these activities. Now, of course, it all is derived one way or the other. Larry's getting nervous over there. It's all derived one way or the other, but it's more the other than one way. That, like the Talmud says, that sometimes you have laws, they're like a mountain of laws hanging on a tiny little thread of Torah. There's like almost nothing in the Torah. It's like a thread, and you have this whole mountain of laws. Now, that's not meant to trouble you. I mean, that's a different topic. How come all these things that are not written in the Torah explicitly, why is the Torah more explicit? That's a topic for a different time. I just want to point out that in contrast, Birkat Hamazon, you couldn't get more explicit, right? The Torah says explicitly, be satisfied and bless God over this good food in the land. Couldn't get more straightforward than that. Okay.
Except
yeah,
you can do a bracha in one line, hands and stuff like that, and Birkat Hamazon is a whole expanded.
Okay, good. So that's certainly a good question. You know, what about the actual form? That's from the rabbis, but this is not really so much asking, you know, where in the Torah does it say these words? It just means, how do we know to make a blessing? And the sages then formulated the blessing based upon certain considerations. Okay. Now the Talmud goes on. Now that we've solved that problem, Larry, you look so perplexed. Is everything okay?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of
You're thinking?
I think not all of the four are rabbinic. I think two are.
Yeah, so that's a different issue. There's a separation between the main three, and the fourth was added later after Beitar, but that's a different story. Okay, now the Talmud goes on. Torah. Now the Talmud asks a very sort of stylistic related question. From where do we know that we're supposed to make a blessing before we learn Torah from the Torah? That before we learn Torah, we're supposed to make a blessing. Where in the Torah does it say to do that? Now, unfortunately, this one is not quite as clear as the last one. It quotes a verse from Deuteronomy chapter 32. Ki Shem Hashem ekra havogodu le'Elokeinu. That when I call out the name of, ascribe greatness to our God. You know, it'd be nice if it would have said, and when you read Torah before it, so says the Lord. I mean, that would have been nice, except for it quotes a verse which doesn't seem to have any bearing to the question, which is where the Torah does it say Torah. Now, before we go on, I just want to point out, you know, what we're talking about. Everybody in this room, for the people who are digitally here, you should know there are 5,000 people here. The camera's facing this way, so they can't see. So 5,000 people say hi.
Hi.
That's amazing. Incredible. So just so you'll understand what we're talking about, that's KI. Incredible. We're turning people away. There's no room left. So just so you'll understand what we're talking about, we're going to take a look in the Art Scrolls. Everybody pick up your Art Scrolls Siddur here, just so you know what we're talking about when it says, how do we know there's a blessing before you learn Torah? So you look on page 16. Before you learn Torah, there's a blessing. So we're not talking about reading Torah now. We're not talking about the reading of the Torah. Talking about every day you get up, you make a blessing, and then you learn Torah. If you look on page 16 here, so you see where it says, or page 17 in English, blessings of the Torah. So that is what we're talking about. This is a blessing. And, right now we're not look at all the words, but it starts at least typical, right? Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with the commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. So it says here in the English. Okay, that is sort of what you kind of would expect in terms of the formulation, and it goes on and it goes on for reasons we'll discuss later. But at least now you know what we're talking about. So the Talmud is asking, well, how do we know that we're supposed to make this blessing? And by the way, the idea, of course, is when you make this blessing, by the way, men and women make this blessing, okay? When you make this blessing, of course, you make a blessing on learning Torah. So what should you do after you make a blessing before learn Torah, right? You wouldn't lift up an apple. Bless you, God, King of the universe, who creates the tree. I don't want to eat the apple. Right? You make a blessing over eating the apple, eat the apple. It's the same thing here. You make a blessing over learning Torah, so then learn Torah. So that's why, for your mitzvah convenience, if you look on the second half of page 17, the Torah from the book of Numbers, it has a passage from the Mishnah, from Masechet Peah, and then it has a from Masechet Shabbat. That's printed on the page there, so that when you make the blessing, you can then follow it by what you're making a blessing over, which is Torah. So you sort of like every day, you'll at least learn a tiny little bit of Torah. These passages right there. Hopefully we'll learn more than that. Tonight we're going to learn a lot more than that. So far, so good? Okay.
Is that why we say that before Shemona Esrei Mincha?
Actually, you say when you get up before.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
When I call out the name of Hashem, ascribe greatness to our God. I mean, we also say it there.
Yeah, it's a verse from the Torah. The difference. So I'm not really sure. It's a good question. I have to think about that.
I don't know if it was a question. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Okay. It's an observation and whatever. Have to look into that. In any case, the problem is Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Haba Godol Eloheinu. That's the verse. When I call in the name of the Lord God, like, what's it have to do with anything? Okay. So I just want to alert you right now. I want you to thinking caps right now that one of the things we might want to ask is, why does the Talmud place these two topics next to each other, right? There's the topic of Birkat Hamazon, making the blessing after eating. And then the next topic is and formalistically, it sounds like they're stuck together because in both cases, it seems to suggest that the Torah commands us to make the blessings. There's a slight difference, which also is something interesting, because when it comes to eating, when do we make the blessing? After. To learning Torah, we make the blessing before. That's fascinating. You're going to see an unbelievable passage of Rav Kook that explains this. So the connection seems to be formalistic. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any intrinsic connection between eating after and learning Torah. There's two very separate things. It's the only difference, or the only similarity is, maybe that's why the Talmud put them together. You'll see it's going to change in a few minutes. Because of this question, the Torah commands us to make a blessing in association with those activities. Okay, in one case after, is before. Now, this may come as news to you, but we make a lot of it in the course of the day. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says you should try to make 100. The Torah says, Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel me'imach. What does the Lord your God want of you? So the word what is ma in Hebrew. And if you've had a little vodka, you might pronounce it, instead of ma, you pronounce it mea, which means 100. So it's alluding to, what does the Lord your God want of you? Mea, blessings, 100 of them, okay? And you actually get to, it's not so hard, because every time you say the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the main prayer service, it's 3 times a day. Each one of those is things. So 19 times 3, you're right, you're on your way. And then there's a whole bunch of other blessings. Okay, every time you eat, and the blessing of the Torah, and Birkot HaShachar, etc. It's not so hard. That's why, by the way, Sephardim have a custom that on Shabbat, they make a lot of extra blessings, like they smell things, make a blessing on smelling. They do that because the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah on Shabbat, unlike during the week it's 19 blessings, but it's only 7. So I want to get to 100. So to make up for that, we have blessings. Okay. So we don't understand the proof text for making a blessing before learning Torah. We don't understand why the topic of Torah and eating are scrunched together. One thing it's important to notice, these blessings that we mentioned before, that we try to make 100, these are the only 2 that seem to be commanded in the Torah. You go through the Torah, you won't find any other place. We blessings all from the rabbis, except for these 2. The only problem is one of these 2 is very not explicit. When I describe greatness to God, one of them is quite explicit. That's why some people say there's really only one blessing from the Torah, and that is after eating a meal. And that blessing over the Torah, before you learn Torah, well, it seems to be from the Torah, but some of the scholars say maybe it's only sort of alluded to, hinted at in the Torah. It's not really a full mitzvah from the Torah. That's a technical point. So first of all, I want to try to end. How could it be that that's the proof text? When I call the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. And this is something I've discussed with you previously, some of you. So I want to take a look at a text, very interesting text, from the Aruch HaShulchan. It was written about 100 years ago. And it was sort of an attempt at creating a kind of more contemporary code of Jewish law. That's why its name played on the very classical 16th century law code. It was called Shulchan Aruch. So the author here named it Aruch HaShulchan. It's the same 2 words flipped around. He says the following. Ubibrachot amrina minat Torah. He quotes the Talmud that in Masechet Brachot it says, how do we know that we're supposed to make a blessing before learning Torah? For it says in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, Ki Shem Hashem Ekrah Havulkeinu, when I call the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. You're mystified how that verse could possibly mean you're supposed to make a blessing before learning Torah. He still explained it to you. The HaTorah, Hi Shem Hashem. For the Torah is God's name. The Torah is God's name. That's the explanation. So when it says, when I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God, that's how this is the source for the myth of before learn Torah. But this needs a lot more explanation than that. Let's just get technical for a second. It says in the verse, Ki Shem Hashem Ekrah, when I call the name of the Lord. We have some Hebrew scholars in this room, including this gentleman to my left. Not in politics, just on the table. So, Ekra, when I proclaim. Spot in front of millions of people. That word Ekra, Kuf Resh Aleph, which is here is translated when I proclaim the name of the Lord. Do you know another translation? Kuf Resh Aleph, Kara, Ukara.
Would be to read.
Mo, check is in the mail. That was awesome to read. So it's usually translated, that verse, as proclaim, because it's sort of hard to translate what the verse would mean. When I read the name of the Lord, so when I proclaim the name of the Lord, say hallelujah, ascribe greatness to God, say amen, that kind of thing. That's how it's the sort of general understanding of that. But if we translate it like Mo said, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra, when I read the name of the Lord. Now, what did we just learn that the name of the Lord is? That's another way of referring to the Torah. When I read the name of the Lord equals Torah, ascribe greatness to God. Well, how does one ascribe greatness to God? By making a bracha, blessing. That seems to be how the Talmud is understanding that particular verse. And that's how we derive, apparently, the mitzvah of making a bracha, a blessing, before Torah. Because it says, when I'm about to read the name of God, right, the Torah, so Havogodo Lokenu, ascribe greatness to God. Yes, Mark?
Why don't you read it after you finish studying?
Ah,
Make a blessing after you finish.
that is a massively fantastic question, and we're going to answer it. Believe it or not, Rav Kook heard your cry of distress. He's going to give you an answer. It's going to knock off. You have any socks? Okay, I'm just checking. He's going to knock your socks off. Okay. But before we see Rav Kook, that's actually where we're going with this. I want to get a deeper understanding of what does that mean to say that the Torah is God's name. See, what I want to try to achieve tonight is an insight into the power of Torah to change us, the power of learning Torah to change us. I'd like to emerge tonight with Shavuot coming up in a week. I'd like to feel super happy and super blessed that we have the Torah because of its unbelievable transformative power, which we're going to get a very important insight into in the next few minutes. So this idea that Torah is God's name, that did come this book written 100 years ago. I mean, the author here applies it to the Talmud. But the idea that the Torah is God's name, that is actually written in the great classic of Kabbalah, the Zohar. The Ramban quotes it in the name of the Zohar in his commentary on the Torah. And there it says, Kula Torah, all of the Torah in Aramaic, Shema Kadisha He. It is the holy name. The whole Torah is God's holy name. So I want to get a certain sense of what that could possibly mean. Just on the most basic level, and this idea we've discussed many times, you know, a name is a wonderful thing, and I actually kind of abuse it, and I shouldn't do it so much. You'll notice that I like to pick on people. I usually pick on people that can handle it. And I say their name. You know why? Because then it's real. I'm really here. Mo's really here. I feel like if I were coming here, I imagine well, I did go to university. I don't have to imagine it. You know, I went to Berkeley. There's 500 gazillion people in a class. I took all these pre-med classes there. What a joke. I should have gone to Sac State.
When I got into med school.
Oh, well, look what good it did me. So, you go into no. So I decided to go for the money. I decided to go for the money to be a rabbi. So, you go into biology class, or chemistry, there's hundreds and hundreds of people, and some Nobel Prize winner gets in front of the class and he gives his lecture, and then you talk to them. As a matter of fact, they're very scary. The only person you talk to is the TA, right? So, I that's not for me. So, name. What's amazing about a name is because the name is, I was just thinking, I was talking to somebody who has friends that are ham radio operators. The handle, exactly. There's this thing called the handle. You ever heard of this before? The handle is your name on air. Smokey, I'm making this up. I don't Smokey, leave it at that. That's my handle, Smokey. Now, isn't that neat? It's called a handle. Now, I actually don't really know why it's called a handle, but I can imagine, because what does a handle allow you to do? It allows you to grab something. That's the amazing. It's a little hard to grab something that doesn't have a handle on it. Because if something's especially a little heavy, a refrigerator, I'm going to pick it up. It had a few handles that would help. Okay. So a name is a handle, allows us to hold something, to have a relationship. That's a name. So when we say that the Torah is God's name, it's God's handle What does allow us to do the Torah? Allows us to grab onto God. I just want to explore this a little bit, just a little bit further. These are ideas that a lot of people are familiar with because we talk about them a lot. Now, I don't mean to offend anybody. Well, I don't know if that's true, but I don't mean to offend too many people. You know, as Jews, in a certain respect, we are utterly uncompromising, and it creates a kind of theological problem. And I'll explain what I mean by that. You see, if there's one thing, let me ask you a question. What's the Torah's pet peeve? What does the Torah really get upset about? You know, what does God in the Torah get really upset about? Idol worship. And if there's one thing God doesn't like, it's idol worship. You know, he doesn't like ham either. But it is, you know, idol worship, that's like for sure. And the Torah is quite explicit. You know, God, especially in relationship to the receiving of the Torah says many, many times, just this mystical experience at Mount Sinai, remember, you did not see me, right? I am not a thing. I'm not a mountain. I'm not the moon. I am not a star. I'm not an ocean. I'm not a redwood tree, as nice as redwood trees are. I am not a redwood tree. I am not a person that looks kind of Jewish, that practices on the beam of calisthenics. The crossbar? No. None of the above. Because to suggest that God is any of those things is idolatry, pure and simple, period. Nothing to talk about. Idolatry, period. I need a stiff drink. Yeah, so we're compromising about that. It's not that we're not compromising. God is not compromising. You know, God doesn't say, oh, you know, I know it's hard. So you know what? I'll send you my only son to make it a little easier for you. No compromises. But hey, it's a little hard to worship the big nothing or the big everything. I said nothing on purpose. It's just the problem. That and human beings are tangible, except the person. But most of us are substance. We're physical, and we need a handle, right? It's very hard to relate to something which is utterly transcendent. But no compromises. But then how do we have a relationship with God? So God says, you can. I'm going to share my wisdom and will with you through revelation. That's the Torah. I'm going to share my will and wisdom with you. And through that, you're going to be able to grab onto me. It's going to be my hand. It's going to be my name. The Torah is God's name. So, Kishem Hashem Ekra, when I read God's name, when I'm involved in Torah, I'm going to make a blessing. I'm going to ascribe greatness to God, that I can have this relationship with God through God sharing with me his unbelievable rule and wisdom. What a blessing. What a gift. Are we good? Okay. Now, ready to go deep? Let's learn this next text. This is the famous fifth chapter of Tanya. I want you to appreciate what happens when you learn Torah. Remember, what are you learning? You're learning God's name. You're learning God's will and wisdom. And I want you to take one step further, and it's a little bit of a paradox what I'm about to say. So don't try to understand what I'm about to say. How's that for an introduction? Don't try to understand this fully. You may lose your mind. But just make a leap, okay? You see, when it comes to us, we could have an idea, but it's not synonymous with us. As a matter of fact, we change our ideas all the time. Person was a Republican, became a Democrat. They're a Democrat, became a Republican. You know, we're always like, you get a makeover. When it comes to God, wisdom, that is God. It's not two separate things. So that's a little bit of a paradox. It's a little hard to understand fully, but just use that axiom. The author is going to explain, what does this passage in the Zohar mean when the Zohar is quoting Elijah the prophet, who's saying in Aramaic, Leit machshavat tfisabach, that no thought can grasp you, God, except for Torah, through Torah. See where this is very relevant to what we just said. Hine kol seichel kshemaskila mesig b'sichlo eze muskal, harei seichel to fesed muskal. When we use our intellect, everybody here, thank God, brought their brain with them. When we use our brain, our intellect, so that thing that we're thinking about, the intellect, grasps that intellectual idea, makifo b'sichlo, and it encompasses the mind. Vamuskal, and the intellectual notion, pasumukaf, it's enclosed, encompassed, umilubash, b'toch haseichel, shehi siglo v'yiskilo, that was thinking about it. It's a really simple idea. So if you're thinking about an idea, where is that idea when you're thinking about it? In your cranium. You're thinking about something, right? It is that idea, that concept is completely enveloped in your mind. Derech mashal, that gives an example. Now, this is true of whatever idea we're talking about. So if you're talking about idea, it's true. But now he's using a Torah idea. If you're using your intellect to understand a Torah idea, an idea in part of the Torah, the written Torah, the oral Torah, your intellect is encompassing that Torah idea. And also your intellect is included within it. You're preoccupied with that idea. And you know what? That Torah idea, it's not just some idea out there floating around that you got from Reader's Digest. It is the very will and wisdom of the Holy and Blessed Be He. That idea is the will of God. And remember, when it comes to God's will and wisdom, the Torah, God and the Torah are not two separate things. We say in Aramaic, also from the Zohar, the Torah and the one blessed be He, Chadhu, are oneness. The Torah and God are oneness. Therefore, we are thinking, where's that idea? It's completely enveloped in our mind or by our mind, and that idea is actually, that idea is God. When you have this idea and you're perceiving and you're thinking, you're actually, in fact, with your intellect, encompassing the will and wisdom of the Holy and Blessed Be He, that under other circumstances, without the Torah, one would not be able to actually intellectually grasp it. Unless it was enclosed in the Torah ideas. V'hu yichud nifla. This is a wondrous yichud. Help me out. Unity from the word echad. This is a when we are thinking a Torah idea, and that Torah idea is literally in our mind. I mean, it's actually more than in our mind. It's like you can't like take a knife and like I'm gonna put someone's head and like, okay, here's the brain. Oh, I see there. It's like it's not like eating a fruit that has a pit in it. Like I'll take away the fruit and take out the pit, the Torah idea. It's not like that. It's the idea is and the mind. You become completely enmeshed, completely. And if that idea is a Torah idea, the wisdom will of God. So this is a yichud nifla, a wondrous unity. With whom? With Hashem, with God. When we learn Torah, we are experiencing an unbelievable unity with the Holy One, blessed be He. She'en yichud kamohu, there's no union like this. V'lo gerkonim tzala, klal begashmiut. In the physical world, you can never have unity like this. You know, I could say, I love this book. I always want to be with it. I feel I'm united with it. That's not unity. It's very close. Here's my hand. Here's the book. Everything physical is that way. You know, you can get close. But with God, through learning Torah, you're not close. Yichud nifla, a wondrous unity that is unlike any other unity. Liot la'achadim u'miyuchadim mamash mikol tzad u'pina, that we become united and one every angle and dimension. V'zot ma'ala yetira gedola v'nifla le'en kates. This is the incredible superiority, infinitely so. Asher b'mitzvat yidiyat Torah, with in regards to the mitzvah of knowing Torah, v'hasagatan, the perceiving of Torah, I'll call mitzvot masiyot, over any other practical mitzvah. You see, he's not dissing doing a mitzvah. Mitzvahs are good, but you do a mitzvah. Let's say I'm going to do I'm going to give to charity. Wonderful thing. I light Shabbat candles. Wonderful thing. I put on tefillin. Wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, what are you doing? I'm putting tefillin on my arm. Hashem wants to put tefillin on my arm. Put a tefillin on my arm. Very good. My behavior harmonized with the divine will. Very good. You know what it's like? And I've used this. Let's say Dvor Ruth, in her previous life, she was a master choreographer. She has written ballets, amazing. Okay, so when people do those, she has ballet companies that perform her works. So those dancers are acting in perfect harmony with what she designed, and that's a wonderful thing. And it must be a wonderful experience. Absolutely, amazing. It really must be. So unimaginable, I would imagine. And that's what happens when you do a mitzvah, right? Like we're kind of dancing in harmony with the divine choreographer's design and will. It's massively amazing, wondrously important. But when you learn Torah, you happen to be doing that too, because Hashem wants us to learn Torah. But something else in terms of your relationship with Hashem is going on utterly different. And that nifla, this unbelievable unification with God that's taking place literally, that God's presence is in the brain. God's will and wisdom, which is God himself, is in your mind, and you experience that incredible unity. Afilo al mitzvat Talmud Torah shebedibur. Now he says something a little subtle. He says that the mitzvah of knowing Torah is even superior to the mitzvah of learning Torah with speech. Now I want to explain something here. And I hate this. You know, I got kind of, I studied in Lithuanian yeshivas. You know, they're not in Lithuania. They're the yeshivas that evolved. And there's an emphasis on like understanding something clearly. So, and sometimes there can be a little bit of cynicism because it's like a very strong intellectual emphasis. And I remember a rabbi saying to the class in yeshiva, he says, Rabbi Isai, gentlemen, don't daven the Gemara. No. What's daven mean? To pray. Now, what do you mean? We meant it sarcastically, because what is davening, unfortunately, often like? Just complete meditation. So that's why. So this rabbi say, Rabbi say, when you come into my shir, no davening the Gemara. Understand it. It's meant to be understood. So that's what the author here is saying. When you read Torah out loud, so that's I guess it's better than a lot of other things you could be doing, but that's not the same thing as knowing Torah. You see, about only works if there's actually a real idea in your cranium. But if you're davening it, well, okay, that's good. That's like dancing in the ballet of Devorah. Like you're using a capacity you have for thought, speech, or action to like conform to God's will. But that's what we're talking about here. We're talking the mitzvah of, that's why he's very careful. The mitzvah yidiat Torah v'asagata. The mitzvah of knowing Torah and hasagata, perceiving it, really understanding. Okay, to the extent that we're able to understand it. Ki al yedei kol, we turn the page. Hamitzvot shebedibur ma'aseh HaKadosh Baruch Hu malbish et nefesh makifa or Hashem meirosha. Because when you do mitzvot, so God's will encompasses you. It's like the choreographer analogy that we used. V'yidiyat Torah milvad she'aseichel milubash b'chochmat Hashem hinei gam chochmat Hashem b'kirbo. So it's different when you know a Torah idea, that wisdom of God is actually inside of us. Each one according to their own ability, right? When it comes to Torah, so, to understand something, there's a gradient or a range, right? Because it's God's will and wisdom. So it's not like, I guess, a problem in math where you can like say, and math is like this, you either understand it or you don't. You can't trick people, right? You know it or you don't. When it comes to God's will and wisdom, it's a gradient. So, if you're the Lubavitch Rebbe, you understand it up here. And if you're Joel Zeff, you understand it down here, right? So, but at least you're actually, there's some level of authentic understanding. And that's a very different thing than kind of just going through the motion, which have you. Okay. Now he says the following. We're going to go a little bit deeper in the Kabbalistic analysis. You ready for this? For those who are following the Hebrew, we're 4 lines down. Sort of in third word from the right. When you know Torah, the Torah is enclosed within your soul, in your mind, and in your intellect. It's encompassed within it. That's why in Kabbalistic literature, the Torah is sometimes referred to as bread or sustenance. By the way, this is interesting because the very same passage in the Talmud, which talked about the blessing you make on Torah, what did it also talk about? The blessing you make over food. Over food. Isn't that interesting? And so maybe one of the connections on a deep Kabbalistic level is because learning Torah is food for our souls. Why? Because just like food is something that you do what? He's going to explain. Just like food, bread, physical bread, it sustains, nourishes the body when you take it in, healthy bread. You know what the bread becomes, or it becomes your flesh, right? You build the proteins of your body, etc. And that allows you to live. Guess what Torah is? Torah is just the exact same thing for our soul. We're taking it in, it's nourishment, and we're getting that sustenance which allows us to be spiritually alive. And then he quotes a beautiful pasuk. That's what the pasuk means when it says "V'toratcha b'toch may I." This is a beautiful now insight into this particular. So the verse says, "Toratcha, your Torah, b'toch may I, is in my intestines." May I, your Torah is in my intestines. What does that mean? It's because that's what it is. Torah is the food and nourishment for us spiritually, just like food. Okay? And then he goes on. Now he's going to get a little bit more Kabbalistic. Can you handle it? We're going one step deeper. Eitz Chaim, which is an important 16th century Kabbalistic work. Don't try to understand this. Heina mitzvot. Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, which is a reference here to the world to come, whatever that means. Do not try to understand this at this moment. So that's where we go. Step, just the souls. But I want to ask you something. This could be of great concern to people that are into fashion. People have lifetime subscriptions to Gentleman's Quarterly magazine, like me. I want to know what to be wearing that next stage. I don't want to be not cool. So it says in this word, what's the soul be wearing? That the garments of the soul are the mitzvot. Because it's sort of external, right? That they're actions that through which you expressed your fidelity to God's will, right? Like your ballet dancers, they use their capacity for dance to carry out your vision, right? So in that sense, it's kind of outward expression, just like a garment, the clothing is outward expression. So that's what your clothes is going to be wearing. And that's what your soul's going to be wearing. VaTorah hi hamazon l'neshamot. You know what? Second most important question after what am I going to be wearing is what I'm going to be eating. What is the cuisine? Torah. The Torah is going to be the mazon. Word birkat hamazon is going to be the food of the souls. Shasku b'lo mazeh b'Torah lishma. For those who engage in the learning of Torah for its own sake. So for us, Hashem, all 5,000 of us, when we move on into more spiritual dimensions of existence, our souls are going to be enclosed in the mitzvot that we did, and they're going to be sustained internally through the Torah that we learned, the mazon. It's explained as it is explained in the Zohar. Now, put in your seatbelts, step deeper. This next sentence made a lot of non-Hasidic rabbis 250 years ago very upset. Because our sages in the Talmud 2,000 years ago say that you should learn Lishma for its own sake. Now, the question is, what does that mean? So a lot of the more Lithuanian-style rabbis said that means when you learn Torah, you should learn it for its own sake, meaning try to understand it. I'm not davening it. I'm not studying it to go to medical school with it. You know, it's not a tool it's not a means for something else. I'm learning it to understand it for its own sake. That's the typical kind of Litvish, non-Hasidic interpretation of that phrase, Torah Lishma. Well, put it in your seat. Mean here. V'lishma hainu kedei likshur nafsho la'Hashem. Learn Torah, Lishma, for its own sake, he says, means that we're learning Torah to bind our souls with God. That's why we learn Torah. When we sit down to learn Torah, we're doing it in order to connect ourselves to God. That's what it means, Torah Lishma. It's actually upset certain people. It's incredible because it seemed like it's then a means to an end. I'm learning Torah in order to, spiritual in this case, it's a very lofty spiritual reward. It's like eating an ice cream cone. It's to bind myself to God, but it makes the Torah into kind of a means. Whatever. We don't have to talk about why the Misnagdim didn't like this. It's not important. But that's why we learn Torah according to this. Ish kfi sichlo. By understanding the Torah, each person in accordance with their own intellectual capacity. Now, are you ready for this? Believe it or not. Is it possible to go one level deeper? I feel like this is like going diving, and you go like a certain number of feet under, certain number of meters in the ocean and deeper and deeper and deeper. We're about to get like where it's so much pressure, but we got to come up slow. Get the bends. Okay, so don't just run out after this. Something bad could happen. Have a cookie and a glass of tea first. Okay, we'll go slow, or at least this is the following. You ready for this? More Kabbalah, but deeper. Mazon hi bechinat or pnimi. Mazon, the food, in Kabbalah, it's called the internal light. Valevushim bechinat makifim, and the garments are called the encompassing light. The internal light and the encompassing light. One of the main images in Kabbalah is light. So a kind of divine light comes to the world. There's two sort of modalities, perhaps the way we could explain it, of that light. Some divine light is internalized, it's or pnimi, and some of that light is encompassing. So when we do mitzvot, it creates an encompassing light, and when we learn Torah, it creates a internalized light. That's why our sages said that the study of Torah is equal to all the other mitzvot. Because the mitzvot are only the garments. They're the encompassing light. But Torah is the sustenance. It's inside. The gam levush, but it's also external, because when you study Torah, you're always doing God's will, right? That's the act of learning Torah is a mitzvah. So that's why Torah is incomparable in its impact, because it's both the internal light, which regular mitzvot are not. They're just the encompassing light. But it also is the encompassing light too. It's the garment because it's doing a mitzvah. Okay. So we're going to have to pause. And now you're going to see what next week we're going to learn this piece from Rav Kook. Maybe I'll even translate it by the time next week comes around, because I just didn't get around to translating. I just have the Hebrew text here. I'll try to translate it, where Rav Kook answers Mark's question, where he tries to, he addresses this issue of, really need understanding now about, there is a connection between when the Talmud discusses the bracha over eating and the bracha over Torah, really interesting connection there. But now Rav Kook is going to address this issue of, though at least at face value, both of those are mitzvot from the Torah, there's a really interesting difference. And that is the blessing the Torah has us say over eating is subsequent. The blessing that is over Torah is before we learn Torah. Why? Don't answer that question now. Rav Kook is going to say something that is going to knock your socks off, but you're going to have to hang on for a week. Can you handle that? Don't sleep for a week. Okay. We'll discuss that next week. Have a really fantastic week, everybody. Take care. Bye.